All right, so let's see. Today, what we're doing is taking Maya Paint Effects trees and try to make them look a little bit better. Okay, so to create a tree is under Windows. Now I'm using my 2022.3, so they've moved the content browser location. Usually it's under General Editor's content browser. In here, it's out of that menu. So either way, it's either going to be in General Editor's content browser or it's going to be right under Windows content browser. The other way to find it is just click on the little search button and start typing in content. There it is. So content browser is right there. You can just get it from the list. So either way. All right, so Windows content browser, and under Paint Effects, let's see, trees mesh. Okay, so you got a whole bunch of different trees here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do two different types of trees. I'm going to do a maple and then something else. So let's start with the maple. Just click on it. You're going to get a brush, B, and left mouse. Hold down B, left mouse click, and drag left and right with the left mouse button. It's going to increase or decrease the size of the brush. The size of the brush determines the size of the tree, right? So that's how big that is. If I make it smaller, I get a smaller tree. Okay, so we're just going to get a decent size. So something like that, right? And with these trees, the more you drag, the more trees you get. So it's up to you if you want to get a cluster, or if you just want one, you just click, make it a real short stroke. You could also do sort of circle of trees. You can keep on doing until you have something you like. Now the trick to Paint Effects trees is having enough of a cloud of leaves so that when they render, they don't look too sparse and just fake looking. So you need a decent number, and with these trees, having a few of the trees on there will certainly help that. Now at the edges, areas like this may not look, but when you got a lot of them around each other, it will help with that. So let's go with this right here. Okay, so that's my first tree. So what I'm going to do is just hit Q to get out of that tool. Okay, so now I'm out of that tool. And so we have a stroke and a curve. So these are, as Paint Effects trees, they don't really render in Arnold. Arnold is not really built to render these as Paint Effects. So to deal with that, we have to convert them. Now, before we even go there, let's look at the leaves here. So each leaf is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygons. That's a lot of polygons for a single leaf. I'm thinking maybe 2 to 3 should be good. So in the attribute editor, I'm going to look in here. So there's a stroke shape maple here. What I'm looking for is the maple 1 tab. And if I go into tubes and I go to growth, notice that we have branches, twigs, and leaves. We want to go, and these are activated. We want to go into leaves here. And there's all kinds of settings. You can always come in here and mess with the settings. I'm going to, keep it minimal. Leaf bend. If you want to put a little bend in your leaves, you can mess with that. Leaf segments right here. Let's drop this to 3. Okay, so when this converts to polygons, it's going to be much less. It's going to be like half the number of polygons. Leaf flatness. Probably want to leave, yeah, because you see how now that's 3. That's like a box now instead of so let's leave that at 1. Feel free to play with the settings here. There's all kinds of settings that you can mess with. You can also increase the number of leaves. Leaves in cluster is set to 1. If you set this to 2, it's just going to double the amount of leaves. It's a trial and error thing. You just got to figure out what works for you. Number of leaf clusters is 45. Let's try 50. Right, so now we have more leaves. Again, to really try to sell this later when we go to render, we want to have a decent, thick sort of cloud of leaves. The edge branches are, they're not going to look the greatest, but These are the limitations of using Paint Effects instead of using a plugin. But, you know, if you have Maya, these are free, so we'll make them work. Okay, so once you're more or less happy with what you have here, and you can see some of this weird sort of depth sorting with the trunks here, I think that'll be fine once we convert to polygons. So I'm just going to click this again, and I want to save this file right here. And let's see. Okay, so now we have we have our tree here. So we need to convert it to polygons. So modify, convert Paint Effects to polygons. We're going to go in the options, and we want to make sure it's set to quad output 100,000. Poly limit is how, you know, what's the maximum number of polygons that this thing will allow the tree to have. And it breaks up as 100,000 for the leaves and 100,000 for the trunks maximum. So, you know, you could potentially have up to 200,000 polygons if the trunks are really heavy as well. In this case, the trunks aren't going to be heavy, so we'll see. If I hit convert, need to look at it and see. If I hit the polygon limit, then I'm probably going to lose some leaves, for example. But I'm looking at it. If I click on this and go under display, heads up display, poly count, it's going to give me my stats here. So I only have about 27,000 faces for the number of leaves. So we didn't need to go that high to, you know, to get to 100,000. And the trunks, those are only about 22,000 as well. So not bad at all. Now the leaves and the trunks are put into this group right here, which is really convenient. It groups them for us. And right now, if we look at my actually, it doesn't show the history, but this is still connected to the strokes. So if I select both the leaves and the trunks and just delete history, that should now sever the connection and hopefully make things a little bit lighter. And then if I want, I can just go ahead and just delete the stroke and the curve just to get them out of the scene. Okay, so now with this set as polygons, if I was to render this in Arnold, it would render. But what I have to do is change the textures, because right now the textures are not that great. What I'm going to do is just go to Arnold Lights and do a Sky Dome light, and I'm going to go find an HDR map. So attribute editor, click in here, go to file, and then go find an HDR map. Okay, I'm gonna pick an HDR map that has, you know, a pretty strong sunlight, just so that I could really see the leaves. Okay, and the sun is over there. So let's just look at what it looks like with the default textures. I'm gonna save my file first, and let's go open the render view and render. Okay, so not very good, right? The leaves are black. It's just the trunks are not the greatest either. So I'm going to stop that, and let's go into the hypershade. And let me close this down. There we go. So in the hypershade, what we got here now, because we converted those trees, it gave us a texture for the leaves and a texture for the actual bark. So the first way we're going to do this is we're going to use the textures that came with the tree, and then we're going to upgrade those textures and get better textures on the tree to see the difference between the two. So let's start with the leaf. So Maple 1 leaf, right click, hold the right click, go to Graph Network, and this is the shader that we get. Okay. So there's a maple leaf texture. It's probably a very low resolution texture, because these they really haven't changed since, you know, old versions of Maya. So there's probably really low resolution, but it's all plugged into a what do we have here? Just a ramp shader, really old style shader. We're gonna upgrade it to AI standard surface. So I'm gonna go Arnold shader, AI standard surface, right? So I'm just going to double click here and call this, maple shader. Okay, so that's our maple shader right there. I'm going to take the out color, put it into base color. Okay, that way I'm using that leaf texture is my base color. And then what I'm going to do now, notice we don't have any bump maps or anything like that. All we have is just really the original texture, and then they've tried to do some things here, but we're not going to worry about that. What we're going to need is some kind of roughness map, and then maybe a bump map as well. So we're going to generate them from this image, and the way we're going to do that is using an AI color correct node. So if I hit tab and start typing in AI color correct, okay, that's going to give us a color correct node, and I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it, just because one is going to be for roughness, one is going to be for bump. So out color the input. Let's just do it to both. Okay. And for specular roughness, since this is a single value, it's not a compound value. Anytime you see a plus, it means it's a compound value because it's got R, G, and B channels. This is a single channel here, so we can't go from out color, which is compound, into this single channel here. So we're just going to go to out alpha, and what we can do then is also make sure that we turn on is luminance, so that it's using the luminance of the map to determine the roughness. And we're going to do the same. Actually, no, we're not going to do the same with the bump. For the bump, we need a bump 2D node in here because you can't plug this directly into normal camera. You have to go through a bump node. So hit tab and just do a bump 2D. Okay, out color. Actually, not out color, out alpha to bump value, and out normal to normal camera. Okay, so our bump depth right now is set to 1. We're going to leave it. This is the strength value to increase or decrease the amount of bump. We're gonna see what that looks like when we render. Okay, so this is now plugged into specular roughness, and let's go ahead and do is luminance on the one for the bump map as well. Okay, now the first thing I want to do in both of these is just remove the saturation. It's going to turn into a grayscale map. And so let's see. Oh, and then of course what we need to do is select the leaves, then come over here and just right click and go to assign material to viewport selection. That's going to apply the Arnold shader onto the leaves so that it's no longer using this old shader. And in fact, what we can do now is just select all of these and delete, right? So we don't need them because we've got our new shader now. Okay, so I'm going to save my file and I'm going to go back into Arnold, open the render view and hit render. Okay, so still not what we necessarily want, but now we can see the leaves. You'll notice, of course, that the leaves are square and you can see the shape of the leaf, but it's got a black area around it. This is obviously not what we want. We need to get to a point where we can make that transparent. Now, I'm not sure if the original image has an alpha channel, but we'll go into that here after the roughness. So let me start that render again. Okay. Now, what you want to do is make sure that under window toolbar icons, you want to make sure you have the three that I use is show 3D manipulation icon, and that one allows you to use the render window as a viewport. You can navigate in it the way you would a viewport, so let's turn that on. Come back again. Show debug shading icon that just allows you to show specific parts of the render that you want, so we'll do that. And then the last one you want to make sure is turned on is show isolate selected. So that allows us to only show in the render the node or the object that's selected. So make sure those three are on. Show 3D manipulation icon, show debug shading icon, and show isolate selected icon. Okay, make sure we turn those on. So there's your 3D manipulation icon. This is your debug shading, and this is your isolate selection button right here. Okay, so I'm going to start the render again. Okay, so now let's move this over here. If we now want to work on the roughness map one, what I can do is turn on the isolate selection, and whatever node I have selected is the one that's going to be visible. Okay, so I'm going to, let's just hit 1-to-1 and just turn on 3D manipulation, and now I can zoom in here as if I was in the viewport. That way I don't have to have the viewport where I'm trying to navigate there while watching the render. I can just do it in the render. So this is what it looks like right now. So the thing we got to remember, of course, is that roughness, the darker the value, the more shiny and reflective it is. So it being this bright, close to white, is probably going to make it a little too matte, not shiny enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop my gamma a little bit, grab gamma, move it down, just to darken some areas and give the leaves a little bit more shine. So let's see what that looks like. If I turn off this here, now I don't know if we're going to be able to tell necessarily, but if we rotate around to the side where the light is hitting, you can see, there we go. You can see how there's a shine. Now, the black area being black is going to be really shiny, really reflective. So that's not what we're really looking at here. We're looking at the actual where the leaf itself is. You can see there's a highlight right there. So the leaf is showing some shine. Leaves are, somewhat shiny. Depends. I guess it depends on the tree. So we can, again, isolate that. Maybe I went too far down. This is going to be a trial and error thing. You just got to play with it till something feels right. Let's turn this off. So I'm going to leave it there for right now. Now they are kind of bright, and we'll see if that's just the fact that those are in direct sunlight. We'll see. All right, so let's say I'm happy with that. Now let's do the bump map. Again, I'm going to isolate selected, and I'm going to select the one for the bump map. So with the bump, any area that's brighter pulls out of the surface, an area that's darker goes into the surface. So we just, we want to give the illusion of some surface variation. So if we increase our contrast and maybe drop our gamma a little bit. Okay, so the dark areas are going to go inward and the bright areas are going to pop outwards. And remember, this is just an illusion. It's not actually doing that. It's just made to look like it is. So let's adjust those settings. We want to have a good, let's see what that looks like. Let's turn off isolate selected. And, you may or may not see a whole lot of difference. What we can do is on the right here, if we go to basic, actually not showing very well. I don't know if, it might not show. Usually I think if it's a displacement map, it'll show. Maybe it's, the bump maps don't really show, but we'll go with it. We'll go with it, and yeah, I can kind of see, and this highlight has sort of gotten a little sort of distorted a little bit there, so I think it's working. So we'll go with it. We'll go with it as is. Again, if we look at it, you can see we have the veins, which are darker, so it looks like they go in. We could try, see if we invert it. Yeah, that went a little crazy, maybe not. But I think it's fine. I think we'll be fine as is. So I think that's okay there. So I'm going to stop the render for right now. Save the file, just to always save the file. There we go. So now what we need to do is actually cut the leaves out so that they don't have the black outline. So the way we're going to do that is we need to plug something into opacity on the shader, right? We have opacity is right there. And you can see that is a compound value. So what we're going to do is let's make another AI color correct. I should have made 3, but that's all right. Yeah, color correct. And the reason I didn't just duplicate that one is because I've already put some settings into that one. If I duplicate them, they're going to be in this, and they may not be the settings that I want. So I just want a clean, fresh one. So out color to input, and then out color to opacity. Okay, so again, I'm going to start a render. Make sure that this guy here is selected. And, again, I just like to save my file before I render. So let's do that. Hit the play button. Now the first thing you see is that, oh, okay, something's gone weird here. So there's different ways that you could go about this. Let's do it one way, and then I'll try the other way, see if it works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But so I'm going to select this node with isolate selected turned on. It's going to show me what this node is doing. So what I need to do is basically turn this into a black and white map where the leaf is white and the area around it is black. So again, drop saturation, which is going to take all the color out. and I'm going to decrease. Actually, no. Let's increase. Yeah, maybe not gamma. Let's increase exposure. So exposure, and let's increase that. We're just trying to blow out the white, and the black being already black, it's gonna stay black. We're just gonna blow out the white by increasing the exposure to the point where we now have a pretty clear sort of mask, right? We're trying to tell it what's white is leaf and what's black is just transparent. So that looks like that's worked. Let's see if we turn off isolate selection. You can see now that it is, if we rotate around here, you can see that the black area is now gone. Okay, so it's very simply using the black area as transparent and the white area is opaque. Really that simple. There's no sort of in-between values, no gray values. It's either black or it's white. 100% white is opaque, 100% black is transparent, and then, the gray values in between that would be semi-transparent. In this case, we don't have anything that's semi-transparent, so I don't have to worry about that. So that worked pretty well. Now, the other way we could have done it is to simply, and I'm going to make a new color correct, just again so I can have a fresh one. And we'll see if this way does actually work. So I'm going to move this here. Let's go out color to input. And instead, what I'm going to do is open up opacity and run out alpha into all three, R, G, and B. Okay, so we'll see. We'll see if this one works. Let's run that. It looks like it does. Well, let's see. Maybe not. Yeah, it looks like it worked too. Right? So you can see. So, there's different ways to do it. In this way, you don't actually see the result, but it's actually using the alpha channel of this image, the original image. So that image has to have an alpha channel. If it doesn't have an alpha channel, this is not going to work. So you can see, so either way is going to do the job. This way is obviously less work because you just plug in those three values from the out alpha into the opacity, R, G, and B, and you're done. I actually didn't even change anything. I wonder if I could just go straight from, and I probably could. If I just go straight from this alpha into the RGB here, let's enlarge this so we can see it better. So let's try that. Let's go here. Oh, try again. There, R, G, and B. Okay, let's see how that looks. And it looks like, yeah, it looks like it works just directly. So we didn't even need this then. So, either way. So I'm gonna go with it like that. That actually works really nicely. So there we go. Our leaves are cut out now. Now the only thing missing is a little bit of translucency. We're not really getting that here. So anytime, if you want to sell leaves and make them feel like actual leaves, you're going to want to have transparency in the translucency in the image. Okay, so the way we're going to do that, I'll just stop my render there. Let's save. Is go from out color into subsurface color. Okay, so out color into both base and subsurface. Click on the shader. And what we're looking for here is subsurface. Open that up. I'm going to set the weight to 1. That just says how strong an effect you want. Note that if you set your subsurface weight to 1, that completely removes any effects from the base color. So the base color basically doesn't do anything. If this is less than 1, then it will be a combination of the two. But if this is 1, it completely negates the base color, and it gets all its information from the subsurface. In this case, that's probably fine, but if the effect is too strong, you can always lower the weight here, and then it'll be working from both of them. Okay, so just by doing that now, the radius, typically what I use for radius is some color within the leaf texture, right? So I'm just going to click here, get my eyedropper, and I can either, let's try that again. Click here, click on the eyedropper. I can either just sort of sample a color from here, or I can get it from the render. It doesn't really matter. Maybe something like that, or maybe, it depends. Let's see, maybe something a little bit more yellowy. Something like that. Okay, you can always adjust that. That's the color that when the light shines through it, that's kind of the color that comes out through the transparency, or the translucency, I should say. So let's go with those settings. Again, I'm going to save my file. Let's start a render. Okay, so now we have light penetrating. Now, this effect is much more noticeable if you have a light source shining through the leaf and you're viewing it from behind the leaf as the light comes through. So we know that the sun is coming from this side. I'm going to rotate around. And let's see here. Oops. No, let's turn that on. And I know the sun is up there. So this is what we're getting. You can see that the leaves that are sort of just one leaf between the sun and us, the sun, pretty much lights that leaf up. But where there's lots of leaves overlapping each other, you get this nice darkening in here. So that's pretty nice. All right, so now, with the colors and whatnot, if you wanted to, you could put a color correct in between here and the base color and subsurface to adjust the colors as needed. But for what we're doing, this is pretty good. You see that translucency there, darkens there as you got more layers of leaves between the sun and the camera. You get, that light has to go through many more leaves, so you get like these areas right here where it's dark, but at the fringes, you get nice, brightly lit leaves. Okay, so I think that's working pretty well. So I'm going to stop the render. And there we go. So that is the basics of setting up the leaves based on the original texture, but upgrading it to an Arnold standard surface shader, and then using that texture to generate your roughness and your bump map. Okay. Now, it could be argued that from, this tree is obviously not a sort of close-up render type tree. It's not a very high quality tree. So chances are you're going to be looking at it from a distance. So it could be argued that you probably don't even need to do the bump map and maybe not even the roughness. But it's always good to know these techniques. So that's how I do that. Now I'm going to open a new tab here, and now we're going to tackle the bark. So there it is, Maple 1 shader, Graph Network. Okay, and this is not, it's not an incredible texture, but we will use it regardless. Usually with the bark, I just use whatever comes with it. It's usually just the leaves that I'll change. So let's go ahead, shader and AI standard surface. Click on there. Okay, so we're going to go out color to base color, and I'm going to leave this ramp in here and see if I decide I don't like it, I'll get rid of it. And I'm just going to go to subsurface color right off the bat because we know we're going to do that anyway. The trunk has subsurface scattering as well, so it's not going to be near as much, but there's a little bit there. So I'm going to click on the shader. Well, let's name it. Call this Maple Bark Shader. And on the subsurface, I'm not gonna turn it all the way to 1. I'm gonna turn it like 0.4 or something like that. I might actually maybe a little 0.3 something. The radius is gonna be some, I don't know, some brownish color. We'll see. Okay, so we'll leave that like that. All right. So same deal. Tab AI. Color correct, and Control D to duplicate, and then Tab AI. I'm sorry, not AI. Bump 2D. Bump 2D node. I'm gonna plug that in a normal camera. Out alpha to bump value, and then out color to input, out color to input, out alpha, specular roughness. Click on this. Turn on is luminance. Click on this one. Turn on is luminance. Okay. Then what we need to do is, well, let's do a test render. Open render view. And now we want to look at the actual bark. And again, we're not expecting the greatest thing here, but let's we need to, and I almost forgot here, we need to assign this to the bark. So just click on the bark, right click, assign material to viewport selection. Okay, so now we're not using this one anymore, so I can just select them and delete them. Okay, save the file, hit render. Okay, so let's see. Now I'm going to rotate around to where the sun's coming from. Okay, so, you know, not the greatest. Obviously, it's really shiny, and that's just because we haven't done the roughness yet. But if we turn on isolate selection and click on this color, it's not really showing us much, is it? So that's what the actual texture looks like. And if we turn this off, you see that it's a little, they sort of warmed it up with the ramp. So it's a little bit more yellow in there, more you know, warm colors. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. But we do have some pretty sharp highlights in here. So let's isolate selected and pick on, select the first one, which is for the roughness. So that's what it looks like. Now, with this color variation, anywhere that's black or really dark is going to be really shiny. So what we need to do, one is kill the saturation. Two is drop the contrast so there's not so much difference between light and dark. And maybe increase exposure a little bit just to make it less shiny. Let's see what that looks like. Keep doing that. Still looks like I'm getting highlights there. And sometimes, for whatever reason, even though you can see that the values are adjusted, it doesn't update in there, so it's a little weird. What we could also do is just click on the shader and maybe drop our specular. Let's just drop it real low, see what it looks like. So that has, yeah, that did it. Well, we're getting these, and these could just be issues with the, because our sample settings are pretty low, so that might not even, here. We can go to here, render, update full scene. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it could just be sample settings here. Let's delete this connection here and let's turn this off. Okay, that's gone now. That's weird. All right, so we can just set our roughness to, you know, something in that region. Yeah. It's weird that the map isn't working. See if I put the map back on there. You know, I mean, it kind of is. But I keep seeing these highlights. See that one left? I don't know. Those may just be render artifacts. They may not necessarily be highlights either. So who knows? Who knows? But I'm just going to break that connection. Just plug in a roughness value, you know, somewhere like 0.35 or something like that. We don't want to completely eliminate the specularity of the tree, so now what I'm seeing is the bark is kind of, it's a little on the dark side. So what I can do is, instead I'm going to use this, actually, because I already messed with the settings. So let's make a new one here, AI color correct. And instead of going directly from the map to the shader, I'm going to go into here first. Then I'm going to go to base color and subsurface color. Okay, that way I can, let's punch the exposure on the texture just Let's see what yeah. Let's bring it up a little bit. We don't want it to glow or anything, but let's bring it up a hair. Let's zoom out. I think I like that better. See the white of the maple. I think that's more interesting. And that's all personal preference. You know, do it to your taste. And yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'd probably call that good. Okay, so I'm going to stop that render. And so now we have our bark and we have our leaves. Okay, so that is the easy way to take paint effects trees and make them look a little bit more presentable, a little bit nicer. Obviously, you know, these will never be amazing trees, no matter what you do to them, but they're a lot better now than what you would get from just the default paint effects trees. Okay, so let's do another tree, just so we have two different types of trees. So again, Windows, Content Browser, and let's go with the Oak White Leafy Heavy. Let's click on it, and off to the side here, again, hold B and drag my left mouse button left or right to increase the size of the brush. Let's click once, that's too small. Right, so maybe that's too big. So just back it off a little bit. Now, you know, I'm not a tree person. I don't know relative to each other, you know, how tall an oak is relative to a maple tree. But when I distribute these over a plane, what I don't want is for the maple trees to be completely just drowned out by the oak trees here. So I'm making them, you know, relatively close in height so that we still able to see these. If this was a whole lot taller, chances are you'd end up just covering all the maple trees up. So I'm going to go with that. Now again here, with the hit Q to get out of the paintbrush, close my content browser. And in the attribute editor, we want to go to Oak White Leafy. We want to go to not gaps, tubes, growth, leaves. I want to see if so we have about 3 faces per leaf, which is fine. We could mess with the leaf bend just to curl them so they're not feeling so flat. And we have 26.364 leaf clusters. Let's go to 30, just to again increase the amount of leaves. I mean, you can see we can see these big gaps between here. You know, I'm going to save the file here. I'm going to increase the leaves and cluster. Again, if you're going to do this, make sure you go up one step at a time. Don't try to go from 1 to like 10, because that's going to exponentially increase, you know, the amount of polygons, and it could potentially crash your computer. So save your file first. I'm going to go to 2, and you know, that increased the number of leaves. Let's see. Let's go into twigs. Let me just see. You know, I'm going to go back to 1, just so we're not waiting forever for this thing to update. So I'm going to go back to 1 in here. And twigs and cluster. If we go up to 2, that just increases the number of twigs and really gives us a nice full tree. So we may be fine with that. Because again, right, it looks fuller than it probably is, again, because the leaves right now are just kind of square. But once we do the cutout on the leaves, that's going to reduce the size of each leaf. So that the tree might all of a sudden start to feel a little sparse. But let's go with this and see what we get. Okay, I'm going to save the file again. So again, we can't render it. Okay, if I try to render it, at least last time I checked, if you try to render a paint effects tree, yeah, it's not going to render. And that's just because paint effects don't render in Arnold. So just select the tree, go to Modify, Convert, Paint Effects to Polygons, and we already set the settings, so hit Convert, give it a second. So if we open the group here, we have the leaves, which actually got to, well, that's, I'm sorry, that's the trunk. So we have about 100,000 faces just in the trunk. So I think what happened, so you'll see now some of these branches just stop all of a sudden. And that's because once it hit the 100,000 mark, it didn't make any more faces. So we lose some branches. So we actually have to go back. Let's look at the leaves. The leaves are at about 88,000. So that's fine. It didn't hit 100,000. So we didn't lose any leaves. But I'm going to undo to before I convert it. Oh, there we go. And let's try that again. Let's go to modify. Where are we? Convert paint effects to polygons. And let's go 150,000. Hit apply. Let's look at that. And again, our trunk has reached 150,000 and still we're losing. So this trunk is really heavy. Here, let me undo again. And in the stroke here, let's go into branches. I want to see if there's anywhere where I can reduce the number of polygons. I'm not sure if there is. Let's see. Doesn't look like there is. You know, maybe there is somewhere, because with the leaf segments, you can reduce the number of polygons. Go to creation. Segments. Is this it? Let's go to 15. Oh no, that did something else entirely. Let's undo that. Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Well, I guess we can go. We're gonna go up to 200,000. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go to 20 on the tube segments, tube sections. Yeah, that was it. So we're just reducing the number of edges going around here. Let's go to 15. Okay, there we go. So that's just fewer polygons in the cylinders that make the tree. So let's leave it at 150 then and hit apply. And then look at this. And it again reached 150, but you can see this time we actually got further. In fact, Control 1 to isolate. You can see that even though they do cut off. And the reason that this trunk is so heavy is because we got a lot of branching off. Right? It's really sort of low res down here, but with each split, it sort of recursively splits and then makes more and more faces. So some of them made it all the way to the end, and some of them didn't. You know, this may be fine. Or we can undo and go to, say, 12 to really lower this. And apply. Okay. Let's look at this. So we've gone further, and I think that'll be fine. At this point, those will be fine. Okay, but the leaves themselves only 88,000, so that's fine. So Control 1 to, and then just select both of these and delete history, and then we can delete the curve and the stroke. Okay, so save that file, and let's open up the render view and hit render just to see what we get. And we don't get something that's very nice as expected, so stop the render. And come in here. Now it's cluttered my, which is fine. I'm just gonna, so these are the two shaders that were made. One is for the leaves, one is for the bark. Let's right click on the leaves, go to Graph Network. And this is the default shader. So same deal again, just make an AI standard surface. And it's put it right in the middle, so I'm just gonna select both of these, move it here. And we'll call this oak leaves. And I'm just going to go directly from here to base color, from here to subsurface color. Open up subsurface, set your weight to 1. The radius again is going to be some kind of green, so click here and just sample a green from there. Okay, so that will do our leaf color and our subsurface. Then AI color. Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. Let's duplicate this guy. Duplicate, Control D. Input out alpha to specular color. I'm sorry, specular roughness. And out alpha here, actually, we need a bump. Out alpha to bump value, out normal to normal camera. AI color correct is luminance. This one is luminance. Okay, so now we need to apply this shader to the oak leaves. So click on the leaves, right click, assign material to viewport selection. You can hit 6 to show it. Now it's not going to show because once you apply the bump 2D, for whatever reason, everything turns orange, but it does render in the viewport. So now we need to, work these color correction nodes. So let's open the render view again, hit render. Okay, so let's isolate selection. Let's do the roughness first. So obviously first thing we got to do is kill the saturation, get rid of the color. And we want to increase contrast and then drop gamma. Actually, let's not drop it too far. We don't want them too shiny. Maybe something like that. Let's turn off isolate selection so you can see we have a shine to our leaves. Now, renders are going to start to take a little bit longer because now this tree is quite a bit heavier. And actually what I could do, let me stop my render here. What I can do is just select the maple group here and Control H to hide it so it's not rendering. Hopefully that'll speed things up just a bit. Okay. All right, so I think that should be fine for the shine of the leaves. So let's start the render again. This time let's work on the bump. Isolate selection, click on this one. Drop saturation. Let's increase contrast. Pump exposure. I don't know, something like that. Let's turn it off, see if we can notice an effect. Let's go around to maybe something better lit. Actually, what I'm going to do is just get rid of subsurface color and set the weight on subsurface to 0, just so we can see it without the translucence, because that can really over soften the bump map effect. So yeah, you can see the bumpiness. So yeah, you can see the effect. Of course, an illusion, but it's working. Okay, so I'm going to stop the render. I'm going to replug this into subsurface color, and again set the weight to 1. Okay, now we got to cut out the leaves. So let's try that trick. Assuming this has an alpha channel, we are going to go to opacity. Let's enlarge this so you can see it. Open opacity, out alpha, opacity R, opacity G, opacity B. Okay, let's see. Save your file. Start the render, and yep, that worked. And I'm just going to give it a second. Again, renders are taking a little bit longer just because the tree is really heavy. Okay, so that looks like it's cut them out. Now let's go look at it with the sun coming through the trees. So there's our sun. And you can see that at the edges, you can see the leaves are a lot more translucent than in the core of the tree. Now this is a pretty heavy tree. So because there's so many leaves, it's going to be pretty dark in there. But we are getting that effect. And what we could do is also just take this radius value, and if we increase the value on that, maybe up the saturation as well, we could maybe try to lighten things up in there. Okay. So that's what we got. All right, so let's stop that. Now we can work on the bark. So let's make a new tab. Oh, and then, of course, what we need to do is get rid of the old shader, which is this stuff right here. So delete that. Let's go to this new tab, right-click on the bark, graph network. Right, so we're just doing the same thing over and over again. AI standard surface. And I'm just going to go from here to base color, here to... Actually, let's not do subsurface yet. We'll do that after. Tab AI, oh, mouse has to be over here. Tab AI color correct. And duplicate it. Outcolor the input. Outcolor the input. Alpha the specular roughness. Alpha, keep forgetting this. Bump. Bump to the, okay. Alpha to bump value, normal to normal camera. Click on this one, it is luminance. And this one is luminance as well. Okay. So, let's start with the bump, which is this one here. Click on it, let's start a render. Open render view. Save before you render. Okay, so obviously, we forgot to apply the shader, so let's go ahead and just select your tree. Right click, assign material to viewport selection. There it is. Which means we can, let me just stop the render. We can delete this. Alright, so save again. Let's run the render. I'm going to select the leaves and Control H just to hide them so we're not seeing them. Okay, so obviously the tree is very shiny, but we'll deal with that in a second. Right now we're just looking at the bump. That's not actually too bad. Let's click on this one and then hit Isolate Selection. So here we want saturation off. And this is pretty good right off the bat just because the crevices, the part that go into the tree, are darker than the parts that pop out. So that's what we have here. If you want, we can mess with the contrast, one way or the other. You can also raise the exposure if you want the raised areas to pop out a little bit more. Let's turn off Isolate Selection. And you can see that we have a decent bump map. Okay, that's about as good as you're going to get with this particular tree texture, unless you make your own. So that's fine. Let's isolate again, and this time let's go into the one for specular roughness. Let's kill the saturation. Now with roughness, this is not going to work because any dark or black areas are going to be really shiny, really reflective, and any areas that are lighter are going to be sort of matte. So we don't want the crevices to be reflective. So what I'm going to do is just drop the contrast between the two, and let's actually not gamma, let's do exposure. Typically if I want to brighten something, I'll use exposure. If I want to darken it, I'll use gamma. Maybe not so much, something like that. So let's turn this off and see. Still feels like a shiny tree. Now, I might be doing the same thing again where it wasn't really liking that map. I'm going to render and update full scene. Still feels real shiny. So, for whatever reason, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not sure why. Because it is going into specular roughness. We're using the alpha is luminance. But again, the only reason I really like to do this is because it breaks the map up. If you don't use some kind of map in there, it's just applying the same value to the entire tree, which may not be the worst thing in the world for something like this. And I'm going to drop the contrast a little more. And again, it doesn't look like it's actually just respecting that at all. So who knows why? I'm not sure what the deal is here. And uh-oh. Okay, I thought I was crashing there. Looks like we're still in the game. Yeah, you can see how reflective that is right there. All in here. So, I'm not entirely sure why that's not taking my map in here. Turn off his luminance. Oh, I guess maybe it doesn't. Okay, maybe we don't need. Yeah, if I do that. Okay, let's turn off his luminance then, because apparently that's the issue. Okay, that is weird, but we'll go with it. So maybe I can drop my exposure down a little bit. No, let's undo that. So it seems like that's why it didn't like that is luminance, which is pretty strange, but okay. So I guess we'll go with the bark that way. So Control Shift H to bring our leaves back. So now we have so if I hit S, Control S and save, and let's hit the render button again. And now we have our tree. I'm gonna click in here and let's select the leaf. And now I'm thinking that green was a little insane, so I'm gonna drop the saturation a little bit. Okay. I mean, that leaf texture is just, it's not the greatest. Where's the leaf? It's over here somewhere. There it is. So, not the greatest to begin with. So what we're going to do next is just get a custom leaf to put on there and see if we can make it look a little bit better. All right, so the leaf image that I have here is based on this. Now this is just a preview image that's showing all the different maps and the results you get. What it looks like is we have an albedo, which looks like this. We have a normal map. We have an opacity map. We have a roughness map. Okay, this is just an image that I got from Quixel, Quixel Megascans. If you have an account there, you can download stuff like this. You can also make them yourself if you want. Obviously, that's a lot more work. So I'm just going to use one that's pre-made. So I'm going to replace this texture in here with this new leaf. So and the easy way to do that is I have them all in here. So what I'm going to do is just drag them in here. So I want my albedo. Oh, we also have a displacement map, by the way, and this is the JPEG version of that. I have an EXR version. Obviously, I can't preview that without going into Photoshop or something, so I'll show you that one. So I'm going to albedo, displacement, normal, opacity, and roughness. I'm just going to drag them in here. So here they are right here. So that's the roughness. That is the albedo. Let's turn that off. That's our displacement, EXR format, because it's 32 bits. This is the normal map, and then of course that's the opacity or mask. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set these up on a flat plane just so we can see the effect properly before I apply them to the tree. Okay, so actually what I'll do is just hide the tree just to save us render time. So Control H, then I'm just going to make a plane, zoom in on it. Now the default plane is I think a 10 by 10 plane. I don't need it to be that dense, so I'm going to undo that and just double click the plane button here and set this to 1 by 1 right there. Then hit create. Now it's a 1 by 1 plane. Okay. So what we're going to do is first plug this into a shader. Now I'm going to leave this shader as is, make a new one, and then we'll replace we'll apply that to the tree eventually. So AI standard surface. Okay, so this is new oak leaves. Okay. Save our file. So we're going to start with the albedo because that's your color map. So out color to base color. Okay, and we'll plug it into subsurface eventually, but right now we're just going to start with it. So I'm going to select my plane here, right click and assign material to viewport selection. So this is what we have here. Okay, typical just assignment. Let me hide my grid here. Okay, so what does this look like? Arnold, let's open the render window and render this. Okay, so nothing exciting. Just a very flat image of the leaves. So we're going to stop. Next thing is, let's see, where do we want to go next? Let's go with normal. So grab these, bring them down here. And I need to plug this into a normal map node. So tab AI normal map. Okay, out color the input, out value to normal camera. Inside of the AI normal map, you have a strength if you want to increase or decrease the effect of the normal map. One thing we got to remember with normal maps, if you click on the normal map, you have to set it to raw. So utility raw. Okay, always remember to do that. And I'm going to just tell it to ignore the color space file rules. Otherwise, you get this warning here and it can get annoying. So now that we have our normal map attached, we can then do a test render. And instantly you can see that looks a lot more convincing. Even though it's an illusion, you can see the plane is still perfectly flat, but it looks like it isn't, and the lighting is actually reacting to that normal map. So it's acting as if the geometry was, wavy instead of just flat, which gives us. You can see as I rotate around here, you can see that the specularity slides across the leaf as if it did actually have, it wasn't just flat. So that's pretty nice how that works. Okay, let's stop that. Okay, next we want, let's do roughness so we can see how that affects it. So roughness, out color, again, not out color, out alpha goes to specular roughness. Click on the roughness, and again we want raw. And we want to set alpha as luminance on that one. In fact, actually no, with the normal map it doesn't matter, but for the roughness we want to set alpha as luminance and set it to raw. So let's see what that does. I'm going to save this render so we can compare them. Save my file, hit render. Okay, so now it's not as shiny. Here it was just sort of even shininess all over. So let's rotate around it and see. So you see it's lowered the intensity of the shine. Right? So if I save this image and then detach the specular roughness and set it back to its default, which is 0.5. Right? So you can see how much more shiny it is at default than if you plug in a map that just brings it down so it's not so ridiculous. If you want to adjust this, you can come in here and let's see here. Is it, let's go. So if we drop the exposure, it's just taking this map and making it darker, which then gives us more shine. So we can even with a map, we can adjust it to what we want. Maybe I want them a little shinier, something like that. Maybe around there. Let's go -0.3. Okay, so maybe I just wanted a little bit more shine to the leaves than what I was getting from the map. Okay, so you have your options that you can mess with to try to make things better, as you might like them. Okay, so that is the roughness map. Okay, let's stop our render again. And I'm going to save my file. Here we go. So what's next? Next we want to, well, let's do displacement. So displacement is a little bit different. Displacement does not plug into the shader, but it plugs into the shading group node. So that's something you got to remember. Now, the easy way to hook this up, a displacement map is like a normal map in that it needs an intermediary node to plug into and then into the shading group node. Now, if you know what the node is, you can plug it in. But the easy way to do it is just select the shading group. And right here where it says displacement map, I'm just going to middle mouse drag. And I'm going to drag onto the words displacement map. And I'm not into the text box, but here onto the words. And it will plug this displacement shader node in there for me. Now, if you saw what happened, my node network got rearranged. That's because I didn't pin my node. So if I select everything and hit P, you'll see that little thumbtack on there. Now these nodes are not going to move. So if that happens, just select everything and hit P. So there's a displacement map. Let's see what that looks like. Just as is at default, it's render. And you see what it did? It lifted the whole thing up, and it's now added some weird artifacting in there. So what we have to do here is select, let's make sure we're in object mode, select the image. And let's go into the shape node of it. Go into Arnold, scroll down, go to subdivision, pick Cat Clark, and let's start by putting 3 iterations in here. Basically, it has to subdivide the mesh in order for the displacement to work, because the displacement really does deform the mesh at render time. And in order for it to do that, it needs to have enough geometry to do that. Okay, so then we go into displacement attributes. We want our scalar 0 value to be 0.5. Okay, that just tells it that at a 50% gray, you're at 0, and then anything above 50% gray is it pushes it up. Anything below 50% gray pushes down. And then auto bump just adds in whatever detail that you don't subdivide up to. It'll plug that into a normal map to try to give you that extra detail. Okay, so save my file again. And let's try this render. Okay, so now this is what we're getting. And if we come in here and just do basic, we can see the effect of the normal map. If we go to wireframe, we can see the actual geometry. Now remember, this was a 1x1 plane. This is what it looks like when we are at 3 iterations. So if we go to 4, notice how we get more geometry. If we go to 5, we get even more. Notice that the more geometry I add in, the more of an effect the displacement map has. Let's go to 6 and so on. Now obviously this effect is a little too heavy. Okay, so what we can do is come in here to height. Let's go to 0.25. That's just going to lower the effect of the displacement map. So if we go to 7, right, we have more detail there. And again, that's still probably too much. So let's go 0.1. Okay, that's starting to look a little bit 0.075. Okay, let's go back. Let's see, no, let's go to basic. So we can see that displacement happening. Notice if I look at it from here, we're no longer just a flat plane, right? So the issue that we're going to have here, obviously, with 7 iterations, what we're getting is now a pretty dense map. And I think I can go back down. Let's go 0.05 here. We have a pretty dense map. That's quite a large number of faces now. And if you remember how dense that tree is, each leaf is going to have this many faces. So what we need to do is decide where. Let's go down to 5. Where, you know, what can we get away with? So I'm going to set this again to shading, not shading, basic, just so we can see the displacement without the textures. So at 5, we're still getting a pretty decent effect. Let's go to 3, and let's again increase the effect. So let's go 0.1 or 0.25, right? So we're trying to sort of do the trade-off between how much geometry. That's 3. Let's go to 4. Right, so let's go to basic. You know, it's doing the best it can. And let's increase the height to 0.4. Okay, so we're using less geometry. Let's go wireframe. We're using less geometry, but we're getting some bending in the leaves. Let's go to 0.6. Okay, so not perfect. All right, so let's go back now to shading. Now, what we got to remember is that we're only going to have one leaf on here. Right now, we're seeing all of them, but we're only going to have one leaf for the whole plane, so that may make things better. Okay, so let's turn off auto bump and see if there's any difference, and there really isn't, but I'll leave it on. Again, let me just look at the wireframe. You know what? So actually, what I'm going to do, just so we get a better idea, I'm going to go to UV editor, right click, go to UV shell, select this UV shell, scale tool, and I'm just going to scale it down to cover one of these leaves, maybe this one. Okay, so now we have only one leaf. And what we're going to do is again run a render. Oh, there it is. There it is. All right, let's run that. Let's go to shading. So now that's a single leaf, and that's got some bend to it. So I might actually come back in here. Let's go 0.45 so it's not insane. Okay. So with one leaf, that's actually not horrible. Okay, the problem with displacement is at render time, things have to be subdivided. And if it's really heavy and you multiply this by like thousands of leaves on the tree, it's going to get heavy real quick and probably crash your system. So you just got to be wary of that. So that's probably as high as I'd want to go geometry-wise. So this is what we're looking like here. And I'm not liking all this artifacting here, so let's go 0.3. Okay. That's probably better. And I think what I'll do is mess with the roughness again. So select the roughness map. And let's make it a little bit darker. Again, I'm just trying to get these leaves to shine a little bit more. So maybe something like that. All right, now what we want to do is cut out the leaves, right? So we can actually see what it will look like. So opacity, just stick it in here somewhere. Okay, so out color goes to opacity. And let's see. Yeah, that should work. So let's save the file. And run a render again, and now the leaf is cut out. Okay, not bad. So the only thing missing now is translucency. As you can see, we have the sun back there, but the leaf is so dark back here. So I'm going to save this image. I'm going to stop the render. And take my albedo and plug it into subsurface color. Click over here, turn the weight up to 1, set the radius to some shade of green in here, whatever works, and make sure we pin our opacity, by the way. Just select it and hit P. Okay, now we're going to do the same render again, and instantly you can see how that shows through. All right, so there we go. Now we have a leaf that scatters light, and now what we can do, there's a map I actually forgot. This particular, I'm going to stop my render here. This particular set of images came with also a translucency map. And what this one does is it darkens the veins, because when you think about it, the thin parts of the leaf are going to let light pass through them a lot more readily than the veins. Now, the problem is when I use this by itself, it's just it doesn't quite look as nice as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is actually mix this with the albedo. Okay, because without it, right now, the albedo, the veins are just as sort of translucent as the rest of it. These should be a little bit less because the veins are thicker than the thin parts of the leaf. So let's see if we can make that work. What I'll do is I'll show you what the translucency map does just by itself. So I'm going to drag that in here. Let's see, translucency. I'm going to drag it here. And I'm going to just move it over here and plug this into subsurface color instead. Okay, and let's pin those nodes. And let's save. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to save this one. So now we have that one. And let's run this render again. And you can see that this is not quite as nice. Okay, so that versus that. Let's save this one as well. That's no subsurface. That's with the albedo, and this is with the translucency. So what I'm going to do is blend those two together. And I'm just trying this. I have not tried it before, but we'll see if it does work or not. So I'm going to move this here. I'm going to hit tab. let's do a blend colors. So basically just give it two images and it blends between them using this blender value, which by default is at 0.5, so you're getting half and half. So you can make one be more or less than the other. So I'm going to put the albedo into color 1, and color 2 is the translucency, and then I'm going to run that into subsurface color. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep this blend colors node selected so I have access to this. Let's save the file and hit play. Now we're getting like 50-50, and you know, I'm not really seeing as much of the translucency. So if I go to the left, that's adding more translucency. If I go all the way to the right, then that's 100% albedo. All the way to the left is 100% translucency. So let's see what's a good value. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is doing me any favors. Right? It's just darker than the albedo by itself. It's a little bit brighter than the translucency by itself. So let's save this image. I just need more light coming through. So what I'm going to do then is stop the render. Let's tab and put an AI color correct on there. And then run this output into the input, and then the out color of that into subsurface. And save file, run a render, and let's punch the exposure on that while also dropping this. So I don't know. That didn't change anything. So let's keep pushing that exposure. I'll continue to drop there. I'm just trying to darken these veins while trying to keep this as bright as possible. So that's before, this is after. And our subsurface is at a weight of 1, so we can't really go any higher to punch that effect up a little bit. So I don't know. The other thing we could try is an albedo. If we come in here and set this to raw, that really brightens that. If we do the same with the translucency, now we're getting some really bright values here. So that's actually not too bad. Now you can see the veins are darker. May have now, let's see. So this is like a control for the brightness of your leaf. When combined, see, even now if I take this all the way, that gets really dark. You probably wouldn't want it that dark in direct sunlight, so something like that. And then this exposure still seems a little high, so I might. So this gives us a nice little slider here for us to control the darkness of that. So let's save this image. So this was nothing. This is albedo. This is translucency. This is the combination of the two, and then this is it sort of color adjusted. You know, that may work. So you know, you can start to really do some things in the hyper shade here. So let's stop that now. Now that we have our leaf, actually let's run that again and let's look at how things look from the top. Yeah, you know, I don't know. We'll see. We will see. It looks great from underneath, but I don't know if I'm liking this from the top. All right, let's put it on the tree and see what it looks like. Okay, I'm gonna stop this. And now that we have this shader set up, what we can do is Control Shift H, which basically will re-show our tree. I can hide this plane here. So select the leaves and then come in here, Control, right click, assign material to viewport selection. And what we're getting is, now we're getting all 6 of those leaves per leaf plane. Now I had a script that would basically, in the UV editor, it would randomly, so all the leaves, the UVs are this entire square and they're all stacked on top of each other. Each leaf is one of these, so that there's like a million of them just sitting on top of each other, as you can see. So I did have a script. Uh-oh, I hope Maya's not crashing on me. Yeah, it's doing something. Let me just let it, let's let it do what it's doing so it doesn't crash. There we go. Okay. There we go. We're back. I had a script that would take all these UVs, and depending on what you specify, either a 2x2 grid or a 3x3 grid would randomly assign them to one of the positions in the grid. And that would allow you to have multiple maps, so you're not using the exact same leaf per texture. That script doesn't seem to work anymore. I think the implementation of Python in Maya was adjusted, so that script does not work anymore. I didn't write it. It was a DJX script or something like that. So that doesn't work. So I'm going to use just a single map here. So let's go to UV and just select all these. And this is running real slow. I'm not sure why. And I'm just going to pick a leaf. Yeah, okay. I'm going to close the UV editor and just save my file in case it does decide to crash. Let's go in here, UV. Yep. All I want to do is just scale this, if it'll allow me to. And then just like we did before, we're going to just pick a leaf. I'm going to use this one here because that's the one we tested. Oh boy, okay. Let's bring this back a little bit here. Scale it up. Get a move tool, move it up a little bit. Okay. Now let's just make sure that everything's looking all right. I think it is good. So they all now have the same leaf texture. I really wish that script was working, but unfortunately it's not. So go to object mode, save the file again. Okay, now we have a single leaf. So let's save and let's open the render view and run a render, and hopefully we don't crash. Oh yeah. So that's looking a lot better than it was before. And of course I forgot I did not save any previous renders. But we're getting a much nicer leaf texture. Feels a lot more natural to me. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Let's get a little bit closer. Let's look at these sort of edges here. Not bad. Right, really bright where it's a single leaf that's being hit by the sun. And when there's overlapping leaves, things get a little bit darker. So direct sunlight versus indirect sunlight. Okay, so if I go into wireframe, so Just looking at the wireframe, I can tell that I did not set the displacement settings. So it's only got the 3 faces per. So, bear in mind, of course, that if we do increase all that stuff, render time is probably going to go up a little bit here. So, but let's go ahead and do it. I mean, I am getting. Here, I'm just going to make a shortcut to this. I am getting bending in the leaves just because the leaves themselves had a bend to them from Paint Effects. And that may be enough, but let's look at the difference. So actually what I'm going to do is, did I save that last render? No, I didn't. So I'm going to run this render again with shading, and then I'm going to run it again with the displacement settings. And we'll see what the difference is. See if it's worth it. See if it's worth the extra time. So we're at about 50% now. So we're going to see, and this is a 960 by 540. We're going to see what the render time is, and it's 21 seconds. That's not bad. So I'm going to save this image here. Stop my render. With the leaf selected, I'm going to go in the shape node under, again, Arnold. Go down to subdivision, set it to Cat Clark, and what do we say? 3. And the easy way to figure it out is just select that plane. So we were at 3 with a 0.3 in height. Okay, so let's do the same here. So 3 with a 0.3 in height and a scalar 0 value of 0.5, and we enabled auto bump. Let's save. And let's now make sure you do save before you do this. Now we got the displacement on and this many leaves. Let's run that. If there's ever a time it would crash, this would be it. So we had 21 seconds last render. Let's see what we get here. So definitely taking much longer. Okay, so we have way more polygons that it has to chew through. There's literally, 88,000 faces here. Divided by 3 would give you the number of leaves. So if it was 90,000, that'd be like 30,000 leaves, something like that. So 30,000 times however many faces. So this took a minute 16, and I'm going to save this. So let's look at the difference. This is without, this is with. It's quite a bit of movement between those two. That's kind of crazy. So let's look at the wireframe. Oh, actually, yeah, I'd have to go back here. So that's the wireframe now. And let's turn that off. And this is the wireframe without it. Okay, so way more polygons that we're dealing with. So you got to ask yourself, if the tree's going to be off in the distance, I would turn this off. If you come a little closer, again, this is not a tree for extreme close-ups. But if you are going to come a little bit closer to it, then this is the view you want. You want to put a little bit of displacement right there. Okay, so there we go. So now we have, let's stop the render. So now we have our tree. Let's look at it from this side. I'm going to say one more time. Let's look at it from this side in shading. Okay, so it's a tree in direct sunlight that looks actually pretty good. Yeah, we're good with that. All right, so there we go. So that is how you make your Paint Effects trees look a little bit better. Again, they're not great. They're not great at all, but they'll do the job. If they're off in the distance or blurred out by depth of field, they'll pass. they'll pass. Typically, if you want really nice trees, you're gonna get it like a tree plug-in. But if you're, not looking to spend all this money and whatnot, then this is a viable way here. So next thing we're gonna do is let's bring back our maple. Select that, Shift H. Okay, let's render them together and see. So Arnold, open render window. Okay, that's what we got. It's not bad. And now because both trees are visible, things are taking a minute. So you can imagine how quickly this, and this is at just the default settings, 32222, right? So these leaves, by the way, on the maple. So right now for the maple, what we're doing was using the one that came with it. So I also have a maple leaf that's a little bit better. So let's do that. And I'm going to move a little bit quicker here because, we've done this repeatedly. So let's go, standard surface. And we'll call this new maple leaves. All right. So again, albedo, displacement, normal, opacity, roughness, translucency. So I'm just going to drag these down here. And let's start with, where's my albedo? There it is. Okay, so I'm just going to start by plugging this in by itself. So I'm not going to do a render test after each one. I'm just going to go ahead and just plug everything in where I know it's supposed to be. So this, middle mouse drag this onto there. And again, let's pin. In fact, let's just select everything and pin it. Okay, just select everything, hit P. Normal. Here, tab AI. Normal map. Out color the input, out value normal camera. Opacity, out color into opacity. For the normal map, we need this to be raw. For the, where's roughness? There's roughness. And again, we want this to be raw, and alpha is luminance. And out alpha into specular roughness. Displacement should be raw now. Yep, it does that automatically, so we should be good there. Now, before I mess with translucency, I'm going to do a render and see just what we have. Yeah, let's plug in the subsurface color, weight, radius. Sample one of these browns, something brighter maybe. And maybe let's punch the saturation a little bit. Maybe some value. Okay. Okay, so let's select our maple leaves and assign the new maple leaves. Now again, we're having the same deal where we have multiple leaves on there. So we can go in the UV editor and hopefully we don't crash. Go to UV mode, select all of these, scale them down. And yeah, let's use this one right here. Oh, we don't want to overlap these other ones, so actually, you know what? This big black spot is going to be so noticeable on every leaf. So let's maybe get this one. It's got some stuff, but it's not as crazy. Okay. call that good. So again, I want to be behind the leaf. Save the file. Render. Okay. And again, because we're using displacement, we do need to come into shape node, subdivision type cat Clark. Let's put it to 1. Scalar 0 value 0.5. Auto bump. And let's do 0.3 again. And just for speed, I'm gonna just select an area and render that. Not bad. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so now we got this leaf right here. Okay, it's kind of flat. So what I'm going to do is the same trick I did before. And take your translucency and albedo. Right, if we look at, where is it? Right here. Okay, we got albedo and translucency. And we plugged into blend colors and into a color correct. Okay, let me just put albedo above translucency just to be consistent. And tab and blend colors. So out color into color 1, out color into color 2, and then let's go ahead and just put in the color correct, AI color correct. Output to input. Out color to base color and subsurface color. Okay. So let's adjust this guy here. Save your file. Start the render. And what we want is, let's click on this. Drop the blender down. Let's see. Let's go all the way to 0 so we can see it just as the translucency. If we go all the way to 1, that's not that much difference, to be honest. Okay, so let's, in the color correct, if we punch the exposure, yeah, I don't know if we're really getting anything from this. All right, so this is the albedo and this is the translucency. Not a whole lot of difference. You can tell that the vein's a little darker here, but it doesn't look like it's enough to make too much of a difference. There's a little color variations. But overall, these maps are not as far different as the other ones were. So we're not really getting much. Actually, what did I do here? I only used this in the, that's why. I only used it in subsurface, not in base color. So let's do the same for base color. I'm just going to use albedo directly and just use this for subsurface. Might be why. So now let's run a render and come in blend colors. If we go all the way down to albedo, yeah, I mean I can see the slight darkening of the veins versus this, but it's so minor. Let's come in the color correct. Drop. Don't want to do that. Maybe drop the exposure. Yeah, this was probably not worth the effort. So I'm going to leave it as is. And let's just do a bigger render just to see what we're looking at. Things like this right here, don't look the greatest. You could always go in and just go into face mode, delete those floating leaves if you care. And let's look at it from this side. Let's just pick an area right here. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. Okay. So that is the texture setup for these two. So the last thing we're going to do is distribute these leaves over terrain just to show you how to cover a large area. Now I've just got two variations of trees. You can have as many as you want, but in this case we'll just use two. So let's make a plane, make it real big, go in the channel box, set this to, I don't know, 20 is not going to be enough. Nope. Let's try 60 by 60, maybe 100 by 100. Yeah, should be good. And all we got to do is just, with the plane selected, I'm going to come in the sculpting tab, hit the first brush, hold B, left mouse click and drag to the right to make it really big. Hold M, the letter M for Michael, and left mouse drag up and down to increase the intensity. And what we're going to do, let's make it even bigger. What we're going to do is just, if you just click and drag, it'll pull up. If you control and drag, it'll push down. So we're just making a little terrain here. Nothing. If you hold shift, it'll smooth. Okay, so we have just some terrain here that we can apply the trees to. The HDR you can see is intersecting. That doesn't matter. If it's bothering you, what you can do is select it, go into the attribute editor, and if you scroll down to viewport, if you set this to 0, it's going to go away, but it's still there. Or what you can otherwise do, so if I undo that, say set it to 3000. If you want to see it there, you can do that. That way we still know where the sun is. Okay, so we have a terrain. Now we have our two trees. Now if we try to distribute these trees as is, it'll bog us down. So what we're going to do is use the Arnold stand-ins, which is like proxies. They're like instances. So it's a lot more efficient on the renderer and is less likely to crash your system. So we need to export each tree to a separate stand-in. Okay, but first thing what I'm going to do is for the oak, I'm going to select both the leaves and the trunk, and notice how the pivot point isn't at the tree itself. I'm going to just hold down D and pull this over and maybe move it up a little bit. Try to get it somewhat centered. Don't go crazy with it. Oh. Something like that. And let's do the same for the maple. Just going to try to center the pivot. It kind of is. Center it somewhere in the middle of the cluster. And also move it up. Just so when it plants the trees, they sink into the ground a little bit. Okay, now let's start with the maple. Select the trees, the leaves and the trunk. And go to File. And we're going to export selection. And what we want is ASS export. Okay, and scroll down further. You want to export the bounding box. And then we can export selection and save this off. Okay. Now, one thing you got to remember is once it's in a stand-in, you can't. If you delete the original trees, you're not going to be able to adjust the textures after the fact. You would have to adjust the textures on the original trees and then export new stand-ins. So just be aware of that. Okay, so I've saved that. Now it's made an ASS file. Let's do the same for this one, the leaves and the tree, and file export selection. It should still be ASS, and we'll just do oak and export bounding boxes turned on, export selection. Okay, so now we can take both of these and hide them. Now we need to bring in those stand-ins that we just made. So Arnold, stand-in, go in the option box, select the oak. So there's our stand-in. And right now the pivot again is in the wrong place, so I'm going to hold D. Oh, apparently it won't let me do it. Okay. If I hold D, it goes away. Okay, so we're going to, I guess, assume that we can't adjust the pivot point on the stand-in. That's fine. Arnold stand-in, go in there and get the maple. So there they are. They're in bounding. So it's not going to show the trees because that would use resources. But if I go to render, remember the other ones are hidden. If I go to render this, you can see that the trees are indeed there. So those are the stand-ins for them. And that's what we're going to distribute over the terrain. Okay. So this one is the oak. And this one is the maple. So I'm going to select them both. And I'm going to go here to FX, Mesh, create mesh network, go in the option box. You want it to be an instancer, okay? That way it's not actually duplicating the mesh, it's just using instances. That way it's a lot more memory efficient. And then we want to distribute them randomly, so we're going to use this state, or distribution type, I should say. You don't want it to be linear or circular or in a grid. You want it to be random. So we're going to hit apply and close. Now one disappears, don't worry about it. Open up the attribute editor. Now we have a mesh network. So mesh is just a little tool here that allows us to distribute things and do weird little tricks and stuff. So the first thing we want to do, notice that it says waiters 2. That's just telling us that there's 2 elements that have been plugged into this, even though we're only seeing 1. What it is, I think it's actually 2 of the same. I think that's the maple. So it's picked the maple out of the 2. So if we go here to ID, click on ID, and then click here where it says add ID node, and set the ID type to random. Notice how we have 2. And we have a random seed here. So if we go to 2, it's going to randomly, so we increase, you'll see it's just going to randomly change depending on what the random seed is. I'm going to leave the random seed at 1. And so it's going to use both trees and distribute them sort of randomly each across the environment. So let's go back into Mesh 1 here. And what we want now is the random. So click on random and add a random node. So what the random node allows you to alter the shape, scale, rotation, position, not shape, of the objects being distributed. So for example, what we can do is adjust the scale. So on the scale Y, I'm going to give it, allow it to scale within a variation of say 0.8. So some are going to be taller and shorter, and then also on the Y and Z, right? I want more variation in height than I do in width and depth. Okay, and then on the rotation Y, which I'm going to put in 360. So it's going to randomly rotate them between 0 and 360. Okay, so then we have that. You can do position, but it doesn't really matter. Then we can come here into the mesh distribute node. The mesh distribute node just came with, when we created the mesh network, it was already there. So I'm going to go in there and tell it how many we want. So if you want, say, 100, it's going to make just 100 of them. But problem is they're all sitting on top of each other. We need to tell it to use this terrain to send them out. So what I need to do is right here where it says distribution type, I need to set it to mesh. Okay. And then input mesh, I need to tell it what mesh to use. So I know that this is my plate. Let me just rename this terrain just so we know. Okay, and go back into my mesh node here, go back into mesh 1 distribute node, and you have to just middle mouse drag. Don't click on it first because this will go away. So let's go back in here. Just middle mouse drag terrain onto input mesh right here, and notice that we have that. Okay. Now you'll notice that some of these are just at a weird angle. So right here, just turn off calculate rotation and they'll all be upright because trees tend to grow upright, right? So we're just telling it to distribute them on a mesh and it's just going to scatter them, which means it's just going to randomly put in places. Okay. So sometimes this display doesn't update correctly. So when you click, things will change. Don't worry about it. Just when it renders, things should be okay. So right now, again, if we go back in mesh and go in the distribute node, right now we got 100 trees. So if I'm just going to save and then we render, you can see now we got 100 trees all sitting on the plane. It doesn't matter that the plane has, you know, hills and valleys. It'll plug the trees. Now you may get some floating trees. Is that floating? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, maybe. Oh, that one is definitely floating. So obviously that's a problem. And a lot of that just has to do with the terrain. If it falls off too quickly, sometimes you get floating. What we can try to do to fix that, if we go back here in the random and position Y, can we... No, I guess that's not going to work. And we can't go negative. Let's try -1. No, it's not going to let us do it. Yeah. Map projection on axis. Yeah, I don't know. It's the kind of thing that if you wanted it to be this sparse, then maybe you could just sculpt the plane, maybe. See if that would raise it up. Let's see if I punch. Yeah, they're sort of going up a little bit. So I'm going to leave that position Y at 0. And notice that this tree is kind of stretched pretty severely compared to that one. And that may be fine. You could also just lower this, so 0.6 maybe. And you see that lowered it a little bit. So it all just depends. Now, let me see. I'm going to just see what the offset is. Offset position Y, -1, -5. Yeah, it's sinking, -10. So there we go. Hopefully that didn't over sync some of the other trees that were fine before, right? So you gotta, yeah, some of these are like way down now. So, you know, maybe -8, something like that. Okay. So you can see some of them really went down too far. Well, there's only a few. So that's all right. So now that we gotta have what we like here. Obviously, if this was sort of ground colored, it would look better than, I mean, it looks like a snowy mountain, although none of the trees have snow on them. So what we can do then also is go back to the mesh 1 distribute node and let's go to 1,000. Okay, so we have now 1,000 trees. And again, if we, let's see, the sun is over there. So if we get down here, we get that nice rim lighting on the trees. So all those settings that we set have all been preserved. But like I said, if I had deleted the original trees, which I haven't, I've just hidden them, I can't adjust the textures at this point. And if I did want to adjust the textures, I'd have to adjust them and then re-export stand-ins and then reset this up. I don't think there's a way to replace the ones that are already here. I could be wrong on that, but typically that's how I've had to do it. Okay, so we get that nice light green rim light and the darker there, which is exactly the look that we're going for. Okay, so that is 1,000 trees. Let's add another 0, 10,000. There we go. So you want a, really heavy forest. You get one there. So if you remember earlier in the video, I said I didn't want to make the oaks too much taller than the maples because it'd swallow up the maples. That's kind of what's happening anyway. I can see some, but it's mostly just those oaks because they're bigger and they're wider. So if it's placed pretty close to a maple, it's probably just gonna overpower it. So that's one of those things. Plus, maybe 10,000 is too much. Let's try 5,000. But you could literally do 100,000 trees if you want, and it'll render. Maybe 4,000. If you don't want it to have so much overlap, let's try 2,000. If you want to see a little bit of the ground, you can lower this, and now the maples are showing a little bit better. Let's try 3,000 or 2,500. Okay. Just so it's not completely choked with trees. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to save my file, which may not be a good idea while it's rendering. No, that was fine. Just let it run for a little bit. My computer is going into full blast mode here. But it is rendering. Okay, so if you need like a flyover of a jungle or something, you can have a sort of like a drone shot. You could make a nice big terrain, and there you go. Save that image. I like sort of the low angle shots looking down.
Here's something I found on the web. According to
Alexa, stop. Sorry, hold on. She's always listening. Anyway, yeah. So if you have any questions, let me know. And, have fun making trees. All right, we'll see you next time, guys. Bye.